Nice. Okay, so this is about to be a fun little experiment. We aren't really going into this as some of our other podcast conversations that we've had. We are diving into this a bit more messy and a bit more vulnerable. We have some messaging things that we have been holding and we are ready to cement around this new phase of the business that we have been working on and these new directions that we are going in. And this is an opportunity for us to just dive in and talk about some of those things and to welcome in some people in our audience and some of the customers and stakeholders that really just support all that we do to see kind of behind the curtain. And I know that's something that you and I have talked about before, that it's really interesting and fun to get to see that from people, that when they get to peel the curtain back a little bit and see just how people are doing business.
Yeah, a lot of the movements today around building in public feels more just like reporting our goals and metrics in public. It doesn't actually seem like too many startups are actually doing the work in public and showing that because of how raw and vulnerable that is. So
yeah, anybody can report on their LinkedIn once a week on all the successes that they're having and then tell about the failings that they've had after they've processed them. But like, here we are in the fucking messy doings of it. I'm not even entirely sure all the things that we're really going to talk about here.
yeah, and there might be things that we disagree about that, but I mean, we should disagree about that that we are calling in, knowing and trusting that that space between our different perspectives is actually where there's a richer opportunity to drill into what each of us are seeing and how that complements and that friction is actually where you create some sparks.
We haven't gotten a chance to talk about this, but we saw that apartment yesterday. And I want to talk about what the property manager said. So for anyone who's not aware that's listening, not only are we co-founders who work nearly all day, every day together, we also live together. And we were checking out different apartments yesterday. And we were walking through and sort of talking about what each of us needed and negotiating how one particular apartment would work and what each person would need. And the property manager was laughing. We were like, "Oh, you must hear conversations like this all the time." And he's like, "No, actually, it's really refreshing. Usually people say nothing. They don't say anything to each other while like I'm around. And if somebody's like, 'Oh yeah, I don't like it,' they just say they don't like it. But it's cool to actually see you guys really talk through your conflict and like have a productive conversation about it." So I was curious what your thoughts were on that when he said that.
I was surprised. I would think that more couples, we are a couple in that regard, that more couples would actually share. He wasn't even saying that they didn't talk in front of him. He was just like, they don't ever seem to share their thoughts about how they feel. And then what you imagine is that people then move in together and they're not aligned actually on all these things because they're afraid to actually express their needs. And that's something that I could relate with. Growing up in a household where my needs weren't necessarily the first thing that was prioritized, and understandably so, how that would then in turn influence how I show up in my relationships as an adult, and feeling like putting my needs out on the table aren't actually received or wanted, when part of the thing that you've taught me is seeing how my job is to actually own my needs and to express them clearly, and the power that has for everybody who I'm with.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a funny little paradoxical thing about humaning, which is the most selfless thing that any of us can really do is be rigorously honest with ourselves and each other about what we need. Because ultimately, what everyone wants most deeply is connection and to be seen and to be genuinely supported and collaborated by the people that want to genuinely support and collaborate with them. The thing that feels worse than like talking to someone that's a bit of an asshole is talking to somebody that hits you with a, "Oh, bless your heart," and is inauthentic. Because although they're being nice on the surface, the inauthenticity carries with it this uncertainty and unpredictability, and like an inherent disrespect. You don't respect me enough to show up fully as yourself to this interaction. And so there's like a selfishness that I have in the work that we do that we've talked about before. And it's really about the work that I've done for most of my career, which is I care about helping people become more of themselves and build systems that help other people become more of themselves, because selfishly, it's more fun and interesting for me when I'm surrounded by people who are their most alive and aren't just walking around pretending to be the person that they think other people want them to be.
Yes. Yeah. I even feel more alive right now talking about how and reaffirming how important it is for me to own my own needs as something that I've set aside for so many years and decades. Just going through life thinking that the way that I'm feeling isn't as important, or what what I want to say isn't actually going to land with the person that I'm sharing with. But every time I've chosen to take that risk and actually express what's not being said has almost always created more connection and realness with the person that I'm sharing with.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about the like years of my life where I was really suffering, the hardest part was I was like trapped in this like loneliness and isolation of being confused about what was even real. Like I struggled to even understand who I was, what the world around me was, what was like meaningful and what wasn't. That's because for most of my life I was just straight up lying, because I was like overwhelmed and dysregulated, and so I just like created this persona. But then like that reinforces a certain way of being within an identity, which is when you no longer are trying to explore what is true and trying to find the truest way to express what is true to you, you end up watering down your own experience of reality because you can't just go on fooling others. It ends up having an impact on you too, because your memories of what your life experiences have been get tainted by the lack of truth that you don't weave into them. And so when you are saying things and portraying yourself to be a person that you are not, you're missing out on opportunities to learn more about yourself, to have an opportunity to express something that then gets validated or invalidated, but gets to have some sort of experience in the world that then you get to have a memory of. And now that's a little moment of you that actually existed, that you have a recollection of, that interacted with the world. And when we're just operating from like our bullshit persona space, we rob ourselves of that and we feel a little bit smaller because of it. We feel a little bit more uncertain about life. And then we feel a little bit more anxious. And so it's like this weird thing that we rob ourselves of, that in the modern world we don't realize that we end up doing to ourselves as we go through most of our childhood and teenage years and early adulthood, trying to build the big, bright, shiny life that will impress everybody else.
Yeah, one of the hard parts about being a founder, but also being a leader in our workplace, is feeling like we have to have all of the answers when people are looking to us to give them the direction and the vision and the feedback for how they can improve and grow. And so as a leader, myself, as leaders of the company that we're building, it can be really tempting to put that persona on, thinking that that's going to be the thing that gets our people to feel more comfortable and safer. But we know that humans have such an attunement towards sniffing out any type of bullshit. So when we're showing up in that way, it actually is reinforcing a signal to the people who work for us, and not only that, to our customers, that we have to maintain this persona and this armor that we are strong and that we have control over our world and that there's certainty over everything that we're doing. But there's nothing more uncertain than building a startup. There's nothing more uncertain than iterating in a business and world environment right now where everything is changing and being upended. So I actually don't trust the leaders who are claiming that they have an omnipresence or omniscience around this is how things are going to go and we're going to do this and it's going to go there. I actually trust the leaders way more that say, we don't know this and we don't know that. And this is what we're going to do to learn more about this thing and to refine our hypotheses and assumptions. But even doing so in a way that's not even scientifically dogmatic, where we're now like hanging our hat on how these hypotheses or assumptions are going to save us, but really owning the fact that we're going to learn. And like you said yesterday, we're going to feel how these experiences land in our bodies, because the one thing that I think you and I are really dialed into is what does embodied leadership look like? And how can we trust how things feel within our bodies and then use that to propel the decisions that we make going forward? Because our emotions are these algorithms that have been refined over millions and hundreds of millions of years that are capable of sensing subconsciously what's really going on here.
And when you say embodied leadership, what is that? And why does it matter?
Embodied leadership is when a leader is actually aware of and in connection with their physical, emotional, sensory experience of what's happening, versus disembodied leadership. That's often mental and it's in the realm of thoughts and ideas. And why it's important is because when we're disembodied, we're actually disconnected from this rich source of information, which is we as relational, empathic beings can actually feel, is this aligned, or is there something off here? But when we're disconnected from that, we might be telling our team like, hey, you got to do this, we got to go there. But if you actually take a step back and tune into how they're feeling, you might not be noticing that something's off for how they're feeling, or there's something going on personally. And if you actually start and lead with, hey, is everything okay? Or what's going on? Or I'm noticing that you've been more quiet over these last few weeks. Is there anything going on that you want to share? The moment you open that up and you get them to actually express what's actually happening for them in their experience, then you can level set where somebody is actually at.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you look at the innovators and the leaders throughout history and even just recent history that we tend to admire within our society, all of them have a really strong relationship with their intuition or with their sense of taste, as you might call it. And ultimately that is about having a healthy relationship with your body, being able to have a relationship with your emotions where you process them and don't get caught up just running from them, being able to practice skills and do things that actually allow you to resource your capacity so you don't just stay in reactivity. And it's been a really interesting commitment for you and I to really say we're actually not working with companies that don't have a leader at the top that's interested in being an embodied leader. Because what ends up happening is it's one of two directions. You either become anxious, reactive, and aggressive, and you are consistently diminishing trust within your team, increasing the stress levels of everyone else, and ramping up more and more how aggressive you're being. And what we've found is working with those kinds of leaders, they're really resistant to changing, and it's nearly impossible to transform infrastructure within that company meaningfully because everyone is walking around basically saying like, how the hell could any of this matter? He's not going to change anyway. Or there's the other side, which is the person that is so avoidant or gets so overwhelmed that they hide in certain places and in certain ways, but then aren't willing to own up to it. Or when you try to have an honest conversation about how they are sometimes present and then sometimes really absent. They try to avoid it. And so it's really the hyper anxious or the hyper avoidant leader. What both of them are doing is just running from stuff within their body. And so many of them, it's funny because they fool themselves with a story that says, well, I have to keep working. I have to do the serious work. I don't have time for the fluffy duffy bullshit of slowing down and talking about my feelings all day. But we're not talking about your feelings. Talking about the thing is not feeling the thing. Complaining about the thing is not feeling the thing. Reading about the thing, consuming video content about the thing is not feeling the thing. This is about having the skills and prioritizing developing the skills for being able to feel emotions within your body so that you can have access to the most energy within you to strategically dominate and to develop mastery in whatever your field is. It's like a dope skill. It's not fluffy duffy at all.
No, and you're right. When a leader shows up in these reactive or avoidant ways, the team can't actually feel comfortable and safe to honestly admit the problems or the challenges that they're seeing either within their organization or with the market. So you're actually stifling the immune system of your company if you're a leader who doesn't actually drop into yourself and then turn towards your team and empower them to do that within themselves.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the hyper successful leaders have 3 buckets. One of them is they're embodied. The other is they're relational, and the other is they're purposeful.
Mm-hmm.
And so they prioritize developing skills within all of those. And nowadays, within the modern world, way too many try to focus too much on being strategic and don't necessarily invest the appropriate amount of time and energy developing the skills and the practices and the support that they would need for being relational and being embodied. And so what ends up happening is you start to undermine your ability to be highly performing in how you're strategically implementing things. Your purposeful actions start to get cloudy because ultimately you're not at your best and you're going to spill out all the shit that you're not processing and you're not going to have as deep of a well of clarity to be rooted within for how you're making decisions. Things will get cloudy. You'll start to get a little bit more reactive, and ultimately what that does is it creates instability within your organization. And ultimately, a leader's primary job is to take responsibility for the needs of a system. To say, you know what, we are all collaborating here within a vehicle, whether it is a business or a school or a family or a country, whatever it is a system of relating. And all of those people, they come together. And trust unites them, and then hope pulls them forward. And an empowered leader is someone that's embodied, relational, and purposeful, and thus builds trust and hope within their team. And when you show up unstable and reactive, you shatter the trust, so people suddenly are more stressed out in what they're doing, and you start to diminish the hope. And so people's motivation starts to go down.
Yeah, you mentioned how a lot of leaders think that the way to lead is by being strategic. Right? Strategy is being able to look at, here's what the battlefield looks like, or here's the situation, and we want to go here, so keeping these factors in mind and what might happen, this is how we're going to navigate getting there. So what a lot of companies do is that they'll do a lot of strategic planning, and they'll create a lot of these roadmaps and initiatives, and we're going to need some cross-functional cooperation or collaboration in order to move the resources in the way that we need to get there. I think strategy these days is actually so overblown and is a way of masking the fact that there's so much that we don't know.
Yeah,
There's
100%.
there's so much that we don't know, and innovation requires a skill that we talk about all the time, which is adaptability.
Yeah.
And adaptability hinges on how clearly we can actually see what's going on right in front of us. Because if this were, maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the amount of information that was flowing through a system was so much less.
Yeah.
It was you could look at a situation, you could be like, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to implement this system, we're going to sell this product. Now things are moving and changing so quickly that if you're strategizing, by the time you're done strategizing, there's already so much information that's passed through your system and organization that it's already too late.
Yeah, there was a point in time where, as a business leader, you could sit down, you come up with a business plan and a strategy for the next 3 to 10 years, and a lot of the market trends that were going on around you weren't going to be that variable. Where you could say, okay, you know what, we're gonna build a car, and it's gonna take us 2 years to get this car built, and then we're gonna launch it, and ultimately things weren't as variable as they are today. Things are so rapid with how they're changing because the economy is wildly different as far as how many players that there are at a global scale, and the technologies that we've innovated, and just the sheer pace of information sharing. Like you mentioned, for most of human history, the ratio for seconds of attention that we could spend compared with content that we could pay attention to, that we had access to, the thing that was abundant was our seconds of attention that we could spend. That's what we always had more of. Because ultimately, the printing press didn't come out till the 1400s. And so if you had anything to read or art to look at, it was done by hand. And so even the hyper wealthy, the average person today has more access to content in an hour than the wealthiest people in the world did 1,000 years ago. And so it was only really after the mid 70s and early 80s where television started to gain more channels, and they became cheaper to make and more people just had them, and the internet started to come online. Well, when suddenly that ratio started to shift, the content that we had access to started to become infinite. And now the limited resource is not the content we could pay attention to, it's our attention itself. And that means it's on us now. It's on us to be strategic, not just about the resources that we could be spending, but the resource of our attention. How do I spend my attention so that I can achieve the goals that I want to achieve and regenerate and sustain the sort of person that I want to be while pursuing those goals? And those are both important. Mm-hmm. We are both being and becoming. Mm-hmm. You can't do one without also doing the other without really fucking yourself up.
Yeah, the most successful leaders that I know and that we've had the fortune of working with are willing to be really courageous and curious to ask questions versus the leaders that feel like they have to have all of the answers or analyze all of the data points. The quality of the direction that you move in hinges on the quality of the questions that you're asking. And people who are not regulated, leaders who are not embodied, don't empower teams to ask questions.
Yeah.
Because asking questions requires the openness to admit, we don't know this right now.
Yeah. Instead of being the chief strategist and executor of all of the things that the business is doing, the leader at the top has to be the chief systems builder. Instead of how do I create a plan and then start acting rigorously toward that plan and shout at other people to come with me and point us all in the same direction and drag everybody along. Instead of doing that, because that's not going to work anymore, now the question is, how do you create a system for collaboration that allows people to stay working together, to be motivated, to pursue passionately, and to be able to adapt as needed? Because we need long-term planning. Without long-term planning, we end up making decisions that help us in the short term, but will undermine us in the long term. And that's bad for us all around. That's how we got into our climate crisis. That's ultimately how most massive acts of violence happen. You're thinking about short-term returns. And so you've got to think about, okay, if I want my business to stay alive, we can't just focus on what's really good for us for the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. You have to do long-term planning. And technology is changing at a more rapid rate than ever. So it almost feels like an inherently losing game that you're playing. If you're going to plan a business right now and you are thinking about 2027, 2028, obviously the biggest question is what is AI going to look like at that point? What is biotechnology going to look like? Where are all these wearable technologies going to be? And how is all that going to shift our economy? What might be different about my business? And we don't have answers to those questions. But you've got to come up with some sort of idea, some sort of path that helps everyone orient, that helps to clarify some direction so that people can be unified in how they're allocating resources and moving in the direction in the long term so people can have some hope. And you have to have a system, a company, teams, an organization that is going to be adaptable to be able to change from that plan as new information arises, as GPT-5 gets launched and totally changes everything, or as Llama suddenly starts to surpass the other models that are out there. Whatever starts to happen that then surges, we can't predict. The way we're using AI now is not the way we thought we were going to be using AI even 10 years ago. So we are in an inherently unpredictable game, and we still have to make plans. But right now, what the priority now has to be is creating systems of collaborating and executing work together in ways that allow you to be your most empowered, to make progress and adapt as needed.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, how vastly different it is to build AI products versus mobile software or internet-based web software and platforms.
How do you think it's different?
So with platforms, what they force a user to do is actually conform your behavior to how data needs to be entered here, how work needs to flow, how different functions need to occur, right? So whether it's a CRM or whether it's a marketing automation tool or your project management tool, you need to conform your behavior and learn how this tool works in order to make it work for you.
Yeah.
That requires such a big learning curve, and that's why a lot of organizations are actually very hesitant to install new tools into their orgs.
Because it's a big lift to learn new behaviors and really shift behaviors. You're going to have to be
It's agitating.
getting in the way of other things that you're already doing, and we hate change as
We hate
humans.
change. We hate learning. The moment somebody says you have to learn this new tool, our
like,
cortisol immediately spikes, our adrenaline goes up because we know
Who
it's going to...
decided to pay for this thing?
Right. And it's because it's a stressor.
Yeah.
And we know it's going to take us time and it's going to be painful and it's not how I'm used to doing things.
Yeah.
And what's really cool about humans is that we can learn a new thing until it becomes second nature and automatic, or as the behavioral economics would say, or economists would say, it becomes part of system one, and it's our natural, it becomes unconscious, it's instinctual. The problem is, though, when things are changing so quickly and people are so overwhelmed, we don't have time to learn new tools.
Yeah. Well, and not only do we not have time because we're doing so many important things, but it's also when we're the least open.
Right.
Because ultimately, John Kabat-Zinn's definition of overwhelm is the feeling that the world is unfolding too fast.
Right.
Right? And so what that ends up meaning is instinctively the adaptive thing that we do when we're in a state of overwhelm where everything feels like it's too much, things are unfolding too fast, is we try to stop and slow down. Right? We move on from like a comfort zone to a challenge zone to a crisis zone to an overwhelm zone to a trauma zone. And most of the people in the Western world today are stuck in overwhelm, with chronic stress. That's why we see the 3 leading causes of death are continuing to rise: heart disease, cancer, deaths of despair, meaning drug overdose, suicide, cirrhosis of the liver. All 3 of those are impacted by chronic stress. And we have a massive chronic stress problem. The way that our current society is structured is increasing the chronic stress that is prevalent within people and is systematically activating people's nervous systems. The way our schools are set up, the way that we interact with technology. Since 2001, our chronic stress has been going off the charts, and it can be traced back to the 24-hour news cycle. Televisions became widespread through the 80s and 90s. Over 90% of Americans had a TV set in their home by the 1990s. But still, things like the news had set times. And ultimately, people were using the television sort of in like a synchronous way, where it was like, okay, after work, I'm going to sit with the family and we're going to watch these sort of shows. It wasn't like an all-day on type of thing for most people until the O.J. Simpson case, where he was driving with the white Bronco, everyone was tuned in, and there was 24-hour coverage of his case, and that was exciting enough and interesting enough that the dopamine was surging, and suddenly America built a new collective habit. We're going to be watching the news all the time. Those ratings spiked, CNN loved it. Suddenly overnight, the entire news media strategy changed. Oh, we can capture people's attention for more time. And then what started to happen is more people are watching all the time, more people are tuning in. There's more and more experimentation with not just reporting on the facts, but bringing in opinion, framing headlines as even more activating to be able to capture even more attention. And then 9/11 happens. And out of fear and terror and uncertainty that came with that, people were desperate to feel a sense of control. And what helps you feel like you have a sense of control? Consuming more information. They just keep tuning in. What's the update? What threat level are we at? What have we decided to do? Did we find any weapons of mass destruction? And people are watching all the time. And our anxiety levels peaked around 2001, and they stayed there. Because then what was also happening was the globalization of the economy. There were more players in the economy, and suddenly what had made America really strong, being this amazing economic player that had manufacturing and oil and agriculture, very self-sustaining, and so many things happening economically, suddenly there were other countries that we could talk with. Through the 70s and 80s, our interactions with the East massively exploded because suddenly we were trading and interacting more with China. And air travel became cheaper and cheaper. And so people were coming from the East to the West, going from the West to the East, and oh, cool, like China, great place to manufacture things. A bunch of manufacturing jobs gone in the U.S. Big shakeup for people. Ton of unpredictability. A sense of loss and frustration and not really sure who to blame. And thanks to the amazing strides of the feminist movement, more women were in the workplace. And one of the things that did was, at a time when we were all ridiculously stressed out, everyone was going to work. What started to happen in the 2000s was we continued to saw a climb in the divorce rate. And we've seen a total change. There's not a judgment here or there whether or not people should be getting divorced. But the fact of the matter is, there was just a change in the nuclear family, where less and less children were being raised in homes with 2 adults in them. And instead we're being raised by a single adult. There is no greater predictor for a young boy as to whether or not they will become either incarcerated or attempt suicide than if they have a male role model in their life as a child. There's an impact to that loss. It doesn't mean they need to have a father in the home. Most single children, or most children that are raised by a single parent, are being raised by a single mom. And so there's an impact on those boys. And so in order for that boy not to end up in crisis later in their life, they need some sort of male role model. But all of those things are happening. And the incarceration rate for men, obviously much higher. And so then what does that mean for the young boys and how they're being impacted? We start to see the prevalence of opioids. And now suddenly we have this opioid crisis on our hands. And ADHD is on the rise as there are less emotionally available adults there to co-regulate with children, while at the same time the smartphone has been released and social media is out. And now riding the behavioral pattern that we had adopted with the 24-hour news cycle, now we're all on our phones all the time. And so now the boundaries with work get eroded. Now I don't just work a 9 to 5, work can access me anytime. And the erosion we had with when we consume media, thanks to the 24-hour news cycle through television, our smartphones and the way that we utilized the web, the surge of YouTube and Facebook and then Instagram, now we're caught. We are on our screens more than we are connecting with each other. And so we're now the loneliest humans to ever walk the planet. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. And so we are in a collective overwhelm. We are in a transition state where the rate of technological advancement has been rapidly accelerating for centuries. And it has advanced at such a rapid rate, socioculturally, we have not been able to adapt to keep up. We're not sure what boundaries to set. We're not sure how to unite together in groups to create incentive structures for those companies that make those technologies in a way where then it actually serves our public good. We are overwhelmed. And most people don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about the complex things that can seem too nuanced or boring, such as tax law or gun laws or education reform, because it's just too big and there's so many different opinions. So we'd rather just not talk about it. And then a massive cause comes up that starts to get a lot of attention. It's usually a federal or global cause. And particularly teens and people in their early 20s who report decreasing levels of a sense of purpose in their life and increasing levels of anxiety and loneliness. Now they have something that can give them connection and can give them purpose. And so they get activated, and that's great. That's amazing activism. And it turns into this question of what happens to that passion in the more nuanced places? What about your cities, your communities? What about the causes about your local school? What about your state? Why do we only have passion for the activated federal and global topics that we can argue about on social media? What about the more nuanced things, a little bit more boring, but actually impact the structure of our life? So the challenge that all of us have that people aren't telling us about, this challenge that we're all in, is that we are in a transition state. We are walking around with these ancient bodies, with these ridiculous cutting-edge technologies. And we have to create patterns of relating, systems for how we relate together that allow us to utilize those technologies without diminishing and killing ourselves. And that takes intentional design. It's up to us right now, these next few years, these next few decades allow us the opportunity to create new systems for how we can relate together. Or we won't. And desperation and tragedy will continue to strike. But we have to find ways to come together, and leaders have to step up and take responsibility for how their structures are set up and designed, so that we can find our way through this overwhelm, so that we can talk about these big challenges together, so we can find a way through, so we can redesign a more empowered future.
Amen. Yeah, what was coming up for me as you were sharing is how the biggest driver of the trajectory of our society today is no longer the church. It's no longer the state. For a lot of us, we roll our eyes when we think about those institutions, and that they are not really effective anymore. And when we think about big government, we assume that they're not actually going to be able to push things forward.
We don't trust them.
Right. And we don't think that government's going to be able to handle the changes. They let us down with social media. Sure, they could put the CEOs of these big companies in front of Congress and you can grill them, but is there actually any change? And you can hit them with a $50 million fine. You can hit them with $1 billion fine. But is that actually going to change their behaviors? And so when we look at where everything is heading towards, our companies are the driving force of where we spend most of our time goes into our work. This is where technology is being innovated. It's where it's being aggressively deployed, and it's where money and capital are flowing. So the most powerful forces on the planet right now are corporations. And that's where all of these resources are being concentrated, and the incentive system is obviously driving towards how do we maximize profitability. And that doesn't necessarily always align with human well-being.
Right.
And a lot of the work and a lot of the allies that are in our community are actually showing how when you invest in human well-being and when you help people feel more embodied in their workplaces, you actually do increase profitability.
Well, it's about short-term versus long-term, right? Ultimately, if you are a corporation that has a shit ton of money and people are interested in working for you all the time because they get a bit of status for working for you, you can afford the cost that comes with employees quitting because they got burnt out or because they get tired of a certain culture. You can afford the cost that comes with needing to hire new people constantly. So you don't have to worry as much about how you manage people. But ultimately, you're choosing short-term returns over long-term because it takes more time in the back end to attend to problematic behaviors and inefficiencies and consequences that come from poor management and poor support than it does investing the time in the front end to set people up with the support and resources that they need.
And you and I know that. And if we tell that to a leader, they also recognize it too. But we're under such demand and we're so overwhelmed that when we're in that moment where we can decide, I can do the thing that's going to benefit my team long term, or I can just do this short term. I can say the thing, or I can make the decision that's just going to get this off of my plate. We will 95% of the time choose the latter instead of the former because it's so much easier on our nervous systems.
Well, and it's funny when I think about my experience with leaders through the last few years. The reason that most leaders aren't taking a more creative and empowering and consistent approach to their people ops infrastructure, to their culture management, to their manager development processes, is because it becomes very black and white, all or nothing. And they tend to carry this story. They're like, I don't have time for the luxury of attending to a bunch of people's feelings. This is not therapy or summer camp. We're here to get shit done. And nowhere have you and I ever worked with people and been like, look, you need to get less shit done. The whole point here is...
You want to get more done more effectively.
Right. The whole point is this isn't about you not getting shit done. This is about you getting shit done in a different way that doesn't incur as much cost to the trust and motivation to your people along the way. That you can with slight changes about how you're getting shit done, the impact of what happens from that how is a little different. It doesn't have to be massive all or nothing. You don't have to shut down all business operations to then check in with everybody and do some deep breath work 5 times a day.
Don't do that. You're decontextualizing the work. You're actually saying that doesn't belong in this space. We need to create separate spaces for how we invest in our people.
Yeah.
And what shocks me is that when you look at the people leaders who these CEOs hire, they're given an impossible task, which is to empower their workforce to transform and to thrive. But then they're not given the budgets to actually enable that change.
Yeah.
And the big gap that exists right now in people ops is that it's really hard to actually see the impact that inferior, poorly designed people operation systems has on a workforce's productivity and output.
Right. It's hard to draw those lines and tell the story with data.
Yeah.
Whereas with sales, you can say, "Oh, look, we're not closing more customers, we're not getting more revenue.
With product,
Something's not working with the sales team.
Our velocity is slowing down, we're not shipping as many features." But what gets lost in this whole, when you look just at the outputs and you don't actually look at the inputs, you can't see how when this manager talks to this team in a certain way, it actually erodes all of their motivation and it causes them to ask less questions and be less innovative. You don't see that.
Yeah.
But that's what's really interesting about AI right now. And there's so much fear around how AI is going to either replace our jobs or it's going to surveil us so heavily that we're not going to be able to have any freedom to say what's actually truly on our minds.
Yeah.
So,
which are warranted fears because, again, the institutions around us that have so much societal power have lost our trust.
Right.
And so, of course, people are walking around with those fears.
as they should. We should be paranoid over how these systems are designed, and we should hold our leaders accountable to designing them in a way that serves us as the people. But if you're a leader who's listening to this right now, my heart goes out to you because this is such a scary time. We have no solid footing to stand on right now. So I can't expect a leader to be able to make the best decisions for the benefit of their company or for their people. Right now, everyone's holding on to seeing what's going to happen and how is this all going to shake out. And then it comes back again to what does AI enable when it comes to better being able to see through the veil and to almost like the Matrix, to actually see how are all of these previously unknowable, untraceable, complex relationships actually impacting the health of my company?
Yeah.
So that we can make decisions and better predict where to invest resources that empower my workforce's adaptability and innovation.
Okay, so it sounds like we're starting to get into exploring really what it is that we do. And one of the things that you and I have been working on the last week, which is revamping the story and the language around how we talk about what we do. So I'm curious if we had a room full of chief people officers and CEOs and leaders of current corporations standing around and they were like, oh, and what do you guys do? How would you explain what we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I know that one of our superpowers as a business is our ability to listen to the challenges that all of these CEOs and their chief people officers are facing.
Yeah.
And when you really read between the lines, everyone deep down does want the best for their teams and for their people.
Yeah, they just disagree about how to make it happen.
They don't know. They've the leaders who've made it to where they are today were doing something right, intuitively in terms of how they leverage data. But things right now are changing so quickly and so drastically that making sense of how to navigate these changes in a way that leads to a more resilient workforce is an uphill battle. And it's a massive uphill battle that the consequences and stakes are so high for us to get right. What happened with social media and how it ravaged our minds as both consumers and people and as individuals was so it really, like they said, it's a dilemma, and it's been a crisis that has completely eroded our ability to relate with one another. AI is at a crossroads whereby it can further consolidate and restrict. It can further consolidate power and severely restrict our ability to move forward to create a better future. On the other hand, AI has this opportunity to unlock human performance in a way that has never been possible in so many different contexts of our lives, starting with work, but then we can look at education, healthcare, and parenting. So what we're doing with organizations is we're empowering them to take the best in AI, what's actually happening, what do their people deeply need within their organizations to do the best work of their lives, and we're empowering them to create the work streams and the data pathways to bring that together in order to empower both human performance and well-being.
And what's most exciting about that to you?
What's most exciting to me right now when we think about AI and the state of the modern business is what I was saying earlier, that right now we are using hundreds of different tools every time we clock in or we open our phone to do something related to our work. Hundreds of tools that all have different workflows that require us to know the ins and outs of a certain system to get the output that we want. What's most exciting to me about AI today is that it can allow us to come back to what you said earlier, to our intuition and our strengths as human beings in a way that just simply wasn't possible before.
Yeah.
And the whole system is now becoming inverted, where instead of me having to work within this external platform or tool, I can actually focus on what I need to accomplish and get done, what my team needs to accomplish and get done, and how I can best lead and manage within my role to make that happen, knowing and trusting that AI is going to be able to capture all of that complexity and that massive volume of data that makes modern work so difficult today.
And not just modern work, modern living.
Modern living, yeah.
That like AI is a super processor.
So much.
That even within generative AI, when you see things like the hallucinations, we can get concerned about, and those are going to get better and better. But the key here is we have kind of accidentally, we didn't know LLMs were going to be able to do the things that they're doing now. We weren't sure that this was going to be the outcome. But what we now have is this amazing processor for linguistic data. And so when it comes to helping us reorient and revolutionize the way that we live so that we can re-empower ourselves and be less overwhelmed, we have made the greatest possible ally. Because what we're doing right now is we are drowning in chronic stress and content. We have a massive distribution problem. We don't know how to distribute our attention and energy in ways that allow us to regenerate and resource. And so we're all chronically stressed and depressed and addicted and anxious. And we're struggling to figure out how we're supposed to relate with all this fucking content that's out there.
Yep.
And suddenly we have this tool that we've created that can process more of that content than we ever fucking could in a moment, and can help us reorganize the landscape of what we pay attention to on a day-to-day basis to help us actually create the sort of surroundings and environment that serve the values that matter to us, the principles that matter to us, the goals that we want to achieve. That they are perfectly built for that. It's just a matter of the core models continuing to iterate and us making sure that we are collecting the right sorts of data with companies and for individuals to be able to empower them in that way. We are respecting that data as far as how we are utilizing it so that people don't feel like they're being cheated anymore and that their data rights are being respected, and that we are building tools that are tremendously useful for people to be able to do that.
Let's look at the simplest thing that people
All right, I'm ready. What's the simplest thing?
Let's look at the simplest things that people do on a daily basis.
Hit me.
How often throughout your day do you either remember something or you have a conversation with a colleague or your spouse or your kid and you're like, oh wait, I have to do this at some point in the future? How often does that happen? How many times a day would you guess?
Where it's like you have the thought of like, oh, here's a to-do list item for me.
Here's a to-do list item, or this is something I have to take care of.
Orienting, like, is this something that I want to do right now? Is this something that I want to add to a list? Is this something I'm just going to choose to ignore or dismiss?
There's something I have to do and I'm going to need to do it at some point in the future.
I'd say most people I talk to, it's in the like hundreds or thousands.
Thousands, right?
Yeah.
Right. It happens in the thousands. And how much friction does it create when we have to like stop what we're doing and write that down somewhere, or set an alarm for ourselves because we know we're probably going to forget with the thousands of other things that are going to be put onto our plates.
Yeah.
Just taking that alone, right? How that gets managed today is you need to go in again into one of these platforms that could be as basic as a notepad or your online notes or into a project management tool, especially when there's multiple people that are involved in making something happen.
Yeah.
And it's like it's death by 1,000 paper cuts with all of the things that we have to remember that we have to do on a daily basis.
Yeah.
It's too much. It's overwhelming at this point.
Have I ever taken you through the ABC exercise?
What is it?
Do you have your phone on you?
No, I don't.
We need something with a timer.
Oh, you talking on my phone? Like,
Yeah,
Yeah,
your
you
phone.
got your phone. Yeah.
phone.
All right, so let's do it.
You have your phone. All right,
Yeah.
so just like having a stopwatch ready and start it whenever I say go.
Okay.
We're going to do this twice.
Ready.
Okay? So what I'm going to have you do
Okay.
is like right up here, you're going to write the letter A.
Okay.
And then right below it, you're going to write the number 1. And leave enough space so you can go A to Z and 1 to 26. But what
Okay.
you're going to do is you're going to do A,
Okay.
and then you're going to do 1.
Underneath
you're going to do
it.
B, then you're going to do 2, then you're going to do C, then you're going to do 3.
Okay.
So it's letter, number,
Okay.
all the way to Z, all the way to 26.
Okay.
Make sense?
Got it.
Go.
Do I have to do this whole thing? This is too much.
Yep. Keep going. You got this. Nice. Are you singing the alphabet song?
I'm trying. It
got this.
keeps
You got
keeps
this.
getting cut off. I gotta brush up on my alphabet and my handwriting. Damian, we can edit the amount of time that this took me, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna do that. I'm putting the seconds on the screen.
Damian, come on. Oh, I
All right.
I messed up.
And time.
Oh no! Hold on. I actually missed a number or a letter. That's,
Okay, so you messed up. What was the time?
So,
54.
So 54 seconds and a mistake.
you're just like it's like 5 minutes if you're gonna say I messed up the.
Somehow the numbers got lost. Okay, so we got that. Was it 58 seconds?
Yeah.
All right, so go ahead and erase that.
54.
54 seconds.
I missed the letter X.
You missed the letter X. That'll do it.
it. Yeah. Okay.
All right, so go ahead and erase that masterful work of art.
Damn.
Nice. Thanks for entertaining me on that.
Thanks for calling my basic elementary grade intelligence into question. Okay.
I cannot do the alphabet without doing the song in my head. If someone's like, what comes after Q? I still have to do ABC.
Okay.
R.
What's next?
R. All right, now we're going to do the same thing,
Okay.
but this time we're going to do all the letters.
Okay.
So A, B, C, D, E, all the way to Z.
Okay.
And then afterwards, you're going to go through and do all of the numbers underneath them.
Okay. Makes sense.
Okay? Ready with the timer?
Starting. Ready whenever you're ready.
And go. Oh, we could put some good music to this while this is happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Done.
Time.
Well, when he said done, it was 27 seconds.
So 27
Half the time.
seconds.
It's like literally exactly
Literally half the time.
half the time.
Multitasking is a myth. It doesn't exist. Our attention is like a light, and we can't actually split it to go in two different places at once. It is one beam of light, and it functions like a light switch. So when you're going back and forth from thinking about letters to thinking about numbers, you are literally toggling back and forth.
Right.
You are costing yourself energy for
Right.
that switch,
Right.
and so it's taking more energy. And although it's a matter of milliseconds, it is taking time for you to switch back and for you to on-ramp back.
Right.
Okay, I just said 4, now I'm on to 5.
Right.
And that's the thing that we so often forget. When we talk about mindfulness or meditation, mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way to the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally. That's it. And then meditation is a structured attention practice for strengthening mindfulness. And so when we choose to pay attention to one thing and we cultivate this curiosity and non-judgment and letting go and not being so rigid, then we allow ourselves to strengthen our capacity to really pay attention to one thing at a time. All of the technologies around us, the way that they have been built, is to compete and capture for our attention. What they do is they reinforce this continuous partial attention. And so that's a major part of why we're overwhelmed.
Right.
It's now all of our responsibility
Right.
to be able to cultivate skills of mindfulness so that we can navigate through our own lives and build a life that is empowering, that feels fulfilling to us.
Right. But that's virtually impossible in today's workplace.
Right. And
Like when you had me do this the first time,
yeah,
it almost felt like, I've been leading our sales and our fundraise. Whenever I'm just like in the flow reaching out to people, it feels like I'm going through the alphabet. But every time I have to bop out to my CRM and to that spreadsheet, and I have to take myself out of just the flow of what I'm doing and now log that, I'm like, oh, I'm back here. And it doubles the amount of time that it takes. And there's the reason that we do that is like, oh yeah, well, go later. I'm going to at some point need to track what I did so that I can learn from it. And there's value to that.
totally.
Of course. Otherwise, how can we actually experiment and see what's happening and how we can learn from that? This feels like the state of every modern software platform that we have to work with today.
It adds another step.
And I would say that it probably adds even double to quadruple the amount of time when you then throw in human emotions and relationships into the mix. So if I'm like, hey, we're having a really tough conversation and I then need you to take care of this. And I'm going to need to now log how I gave you that feedback.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to do it. There's not actually any time to get the main things done that I'm responsible for.
Right. So in a lot of ways, our sense of structure has actually been obliterated, even in our modern workplace, which we tend to think has so much structure and process. But since there are so many tools that we can be utilizing at all times, there's so many things we could be doing at our computer all at one time, we end up trying to multitask and do so many things all at once that actually it's making us just feel more overwhelmed.
Right.
And we're probably undermining the effectiveness of our work than it could be if we could build in more structure and processes, and if we had some technologies that could get rid of some of that context switching that we don't need to be doing.
Right. Like my dream for everyone at work is that they can show up, know exactly what they need to focus on, be able to go through that in one clean sweep, and all of the admin, documentation, follow-ups, all of the different downstream simple tasks are being handled and taken care of by our great friends of artificial intelligence.
I think that's Sam Altman's dream too.
He said it yesterday. Did you see that article?
Yeah.
Crazy. He was like, we all basically want to have this super agent that feels like our best worker that can go off and do all the things that we need. And even if it doesn't know exactly what to do, it can take a crack at it and come back to us. And it's interesting how we anthropomorphize our ideal AI, because that's kind of how that's exactly how we're wired. Yeah. It's for working with other people in this natural way where we're bouncing off ideas. But right now, we're all being asked to go into this digital world, whether it's on our phones or on our computers, to have to fill out all of these forms. It's like we're all working at the DMV now.
Yeah, it's this weird sort of feeling, right, that we all have, which is like, why don't you just scan this QR code to see the menu at your restaurant? Is this a technological innovation? Okay, we're saving a little piece of paper, but you're creating more steps for me. The person who is incurring the cost of our innovations, the burden that we are placing it on, is the end user. We're creating more tasks for people to have to do, more logins, more passwords, more platforms, more dashboards, and it's things that used to, when I was going through the mail and sorting out my bills, okay, here's something from the electric company, I put that down on the desk. Here's something from the phone company. I put that down on the desk, and I'm doing one task. And then I go to pay them, and I write them a check. I put it in the envelope, write them a check, put it in the envelope. Now I need logins for all of those. I need to remember those passwords. I need a pass key that also goes to my phone. So I need my computer, and I need my phone, and I need my debit card. I need to type all those in. Holy shit! And now my credit card is calling me because they want to make sure. It's like how many steps do we need to add in, and at what point do we really start committing more to protecting the attention of the end user and trying to converge and consolidate these technologies?
You know how the highest executive level performers use their CRMs and their project manager tools?
They wear funny costumes while they use them.
Do you know how they do it?
No, tell me.
They don't. They don't. They have their virtual assistants, their executive assistants, or their chiefs of staff responsible for taking care of that.
Right.
But let's be real. How many companies
the everyday worker doesn't have access to a virtual assistant?
The everyday worker, most middle managers, and even senior directors do not have that kind of assistance because it's really expensive.
Because it's a person's time.
It's a person's time.
If you're going to have somebody that particularly can work with you in your language and can be responsive and professional at doing the things you want them to do, like there's a certain cost that's going to come with that.
Right. So if you want your highest performers to do the things that they're really good at well, you literally need to double the body count and give them another person who can do all of that work in the background. But nobody's going to invest in that. It's simply not happening. So I was talking to a VA company yesterday and I was like, oh yeah, which CRM do you use? And we were both like, as soon as the topic of CRM came up, we were all like, and she was like, I don't, my own assistant is in my CRM.
These are the VAs you didn't love.
No, I love Squared Away. I've used them in the past. They're a wonderful VA service provider.
So this was Squared Away.
Military spouses.
Not the
love Squared Away.
Not the ones you talked to that you didn't love.
I was talking to Jordan on the team about my new AI and I asked her, what CRM do you use? And she's like, I don't. My assistant uses it. And I'm like, that's exactly what I want too.
Yeah.
But what does that tell us if we take a step back and we look through if we read between the lines? It means that these platforms are completely dated and they're not actually serving our needs. So when you look at the future of life, work, the enterprise, you name it, I don't care. When you look at it, all of these platforms and all of the operations that they handle are going to be done in the background. And whether it's capturing the information or the tasks that I've done, whether it's teeing them back up to me in the right context, whether it's guiding me on where my attention needs to go, knowing what my preferences are for how I like to work on a daily basis and how I like to collaborate, AI is going to handle that so I can continue to focus on the things that I do exceptionally well.
And the key for us is to own where we are now, that we are in the transition times.
Completely.
And so that is a massive shift.
Huge.
And that sounds super helpful. And learning new behaviors is hard. It includes letting go of old ones. And so the key is right now we need to be preparing ourselves for how we can be collaborating both rigorously and flexibly so that as new technologies and innovations with these technologies are being launched and becoming more accessible, we are able to utilize them, able to learn about them, able to navigate through the uncertainty and overwhelm that comes with utilizing and learning new technologies. And we need companies that create environments that instill those skills and capacities.
That's right.
Because AI isn't coming to replace all of the stuff that we hate doing. AI isn't coming to do all of our work for us. We are going to be collaborating with AI. Humans are going to be collaborating with it. We're going to be working with it. We'll be using it. It will be another collaborator. And so we still need to be able to prioritize our time and attention and figure out, okay, how do I decide what the most important thing is for me to work on? The times when I do so need to talk with another human, how do I communicate with them well? How do we move through conflict to talk about hard things that matter? Because what things actually matter in a business that aren't hard to talk about? And so we're going to need those skills more than ever. It can feel like, oh, well, AI is on its way. It's going to replace a whole bunch of stuff that's hard for us to do. But right now, more than ever, we need to be asking, how do we build systems? Because we are products of our environments. How do we build systems that empower people to be showing up in the ways that we need them to through these next few years so they can be getting stuff done, they can be collaborating well and empowering one another, and they can be innovating with the latest AI tools?
Yeah. The model that I think about is the tools that are actually like, when you think about what industries are most lagging, right? People talk about healthcare and big financial institutions. When I think about where is AI going to have the biggest impact in the near term, I think about what are the most painful workflows and tasks that we're going through on a daily basis, where the incentive structure doesn't actually support it. But if we actually make those changes, it has the biggest impact on our success as an organization. And so what I mean by that, a CRM is critical for a sales team to be able to attribute performance and to be able to track the state of their pipeline. Sellers are highly incentivized to use their CRMs because that's how they can actually get paid. Marketing automation platforms, similarly. Project management tools, there are dedicated project managers whose jobs and incentives are to keep that thing up to date. And so that's why they're working in those systems. I think the other side of the equation is everything related to people management. These are the areas that people struggle with the most. I called a friend, he leads a 100-person team today. And I asked him, how are you giving feedback to your team? He's like, twice a year. We'll talk to them in the summer. We'll say, these are the things that you're doing well or not.
Remote or hybrid or
They're mostly in person, but they also have some hybrid team members. And then I said, well, and then what happens in the winter? He's like, well, we'll tell them like, hey, you didn't do what we said you were going to do in the summer. So guess what? You're not going to get your bonus. Yeah. So I was like, well, what about, feedback?
I feel like I'd burn the place to the ground.
Yeah. What about,
you've said nothing to me until right now?
Literally. And millennials actually want so much feedback as quickly as possible. And if you don't give them that feedback and you give that to them later, they feel betrayed. If you give millennials feedback later about something that they could have changed earlier, they will deeply resent you. Gen X and some of the older generations, they're fine. They're in some ways.
Yeah, but for millennials and Gen Z, our top priority, number one, when you ask them, when you're looking for a new job, what are you evaluating? And they have 3 priorities that they're evaluating for that are in a different order than Gen X. Gen X's number one priority was they were looking for salary. They were getting out there and they were saying, who's going to pay me the most?
Right.
And then it was skill development and work-life balance. For millennial and Gen Z, number one is work-life balance. And it's even more so for Gen Z than for millennial. You're looking around, you're like, oh, is this going to be a toxic-ass place to work? Number 2 is skill development. Can I become a more skilled person here? Is there an opportunity for me to advance and develop more skills? And then number 3 is salary.
Matt.
And so if you want to be a company that's going to attract some of the top talent, you want to attract the most elite players, young to middle age, old, anywhere
the heart
in
of the
there,
workforce.
It's getting to a point where the competitive advantage you're going to need is culture, and you're going to need to be able to prove it.
Right.
How can you actually showcase and market that your culture is a talent acquisition differentiator?
How do you develop somebody's skills?
Systems and repetition.
And what is being repeated?
What do you mean?
Like Sam doing a certain thing a certain way.
Yeah.
And
we become what we practice.
Right.
And so the key is it's when you look at ways to transform behavior. Right. You've got we probably anybody that's taken a Psych 101 class remembers positive and negative reinforcement. Right. And so the most powerful tool for transforming behavior is positive reinforcement.
Right.
So how do I get recognition? What are the things that give me recognition? And those are the things that we're going to pursue more of.
Right.
And so building in incentive structures within the systems for how people interrelate. And the most reinforcing thing in the world is when a human that I respect sees me and authentically gives me recognition about something that I've done that is hard. There is nothing that feels more rewarding than that. And if you don't believe me, just think about it for a moment. Have you ever done something really, really hard and then had a parent, a mom or a dad say something to you that fucking touched you? Or have you ever spent years wishing that a parent would say something specific? I've talked to people that go their entire life desperate and injured because they didn't hear a specific thing from their parent. Or have you ever spent weeks, months, or years wishing that your spouse would say that one thing? Or ever had that moment when a spouse said that one thing? Or how sometimes even just saying thank you for taking out the trash or thank you for doing the dishes from the person that you love most, the person that you most want to be respected by. That is the most reinforcing thing for us, because ultimately behavior change is about reinforcing the identity that actually holds that behavior that I'm enacting.
Yeah.
And so it needs validation. And the strongest tool for validation is validation coming from another person that we respect.
Right. So it's not just positive reinforcement, but it's a form of contextual, qualified positive reinforcement. And
Personalized,
Right.
precise, persistent feedback.
and it comes from a place of power. It's coming
Yeah.
from power that you respect, that you deeply respect.
Yeah.
Now, before we get into critical or negative reinforcement, I'm really curious, like how shitty does it feel when you've done the thing that the other person is either, you know that they want you to do or they've asked you to do, or you know that it's the right thing to do
Yeah.
in your heart and bones,
Yeah.
and you get zero acknowledgement or recognition for it.
So-
how shitty does that feel?
Oh, it's the worst. It's interesting. The John and Julie Gottman are some of the top relationship researchers in the world for like romantic relationships.
the Four Horsemen.
Yeah, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Their research lab was they would invite couples to come and like stay in this apartment that had cameras in certain rooms.
Yeah.
And they would track different behaviors.
Yep.
Their studies show that there is one thing that is the greatest predictor of a healthy relationship, which is, do you celebrate my accomplishments with me?
That's the number one predictor.
It's not how well you support me in the bad times.
Right.
It's how well
Right.
do you show up at the times when I want someone to
Right.
celebrate.
Right.
Do you witness my accomplishments?
Right.
The person who I want to most feel like sees me and believes that I matter. At the moments when I most want to be witnessed for mattering.
Yeah.
Do they see me? And so there's a huge cost that comes in a romantic relationship when those moments go missed.
I've been there.
And it's not just a romantic relationship. Imagine having a birthday and some of your best friends don't call. How does that feel? Or when somebody knows you're about to go run a marathon and your homies don't check in on you to see how you went, or nobody shows up for you at the finish line. How
Right.
does that feel?
Right.
It's the same thing with work relationships. The people that we want to be supported by, the people that we respect.
Right.
The people who say they're there to hold us accountable and
Who have
empower us to be
power in our
successful.
lives.
Who have power over who we are and how we operate.
Right.
There needs to be intentional recognition
Right.
that is connected to what matters to us.
Right.
That's connected to the things that we're contributing to within our shared mission.
Right. So it's almost like when I do the thing that I want to be recognized for, I'm anticipating and craving that feedback. And if that's not met, the low is lower than anything.
Well, because you got to figure the thing that we are most wired for is to connect and to make sense of our world around us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We evolved for over 99% of Homo
Mm-hmm.
sapiens existence on this planet. We lived as hunter-gatherer nomadic tribes.
Yep.
And we developed story and language
Right.
to help us make sense of all of these things that are going on around us. So we are always looking for, who can I connect to so that I can feel safe? The people that I am connected to, that are my core connections, how are those doing? Do I feel safe enough?
Yep.
And we need that for our nervous system. And we're always thinking, okay, what's going on here? Can I make sense of what's going on based on what my experiences have been?
Yep.
And so what starts to happen is when I am taking action within a business, what I'm doing is I am contributing. I'm not doing it just because I want a paycheck. I'm also doing it because it serves my identity.
Yeah.
I want to feel important. I want to feel like I matter. The thing that so many leaders don't get is that the number one thing that humans are missing today is the exact thing that every workplace can give them, and it's good for business, and it's belonging and purpose. And it's just a design change that it takes to be able to implement that. It doesn't mean not holding people accountable. In fact, it means being more intentional about how you hold people accountable. It doesn't mean not drawing boundaries. In fact, it means being more intentional about the boundaries that you draw, so that you are creating the trust, which is the bridge that belonging is built on.
So I have so many questions right now. How are we doing on time?
Greg, how are we doing on time?
15
minutes.
We're not going to do so much on the website, but I think
No.
I think we can land this plane.
Cool.
I have two questions that I really want to get into, which is
Cool. If one of them is the best dessert, you know the
we know
answers.
the answer, and we might be having it later today.
That sounds
My
sick.
my first question is, why is it so hard for us to give positive feedback in the most lowest common denominator terms?
Yeah.
The second question is around negative and critical feedback.
Yeah.
So let's close the thread on why is it so hard for us as leaders and colleagues to give positive reinforcement to one another?
In a lot of ways, it's even harder today than it was 30 years ago. Because there's a couple different layers. One is most of us, particularly men in this society, don't learn and aren't taught skills for vulnerably talking about their emotions or leaning into uncertainty vulnerably and genuinely expressing affection. In fact, typical masculinity norms in the West through the last few hundred years specifically don't encourage that. And so for a lot of leaders in a lot of these corporations, the norms for how leadership is done were written by men. And so some of that has just seeped in.
By men who didn't get positive feedback growing up.
Right, and just didn't learn how to own vulnerability as part of their masculinity.
And why is giving positive feedback vulnerable?
Because ultimately, when I'm giving you positive feedback,
Mm-hmm.
I am stepping into this place of connection with you, where I'm telling you that I'm seeing you. Right? It's almost like it's like I have to become soft in the front,
right, and
to be able to just like be genuine and kind toward you.
And so many leaders feel like if they're not cracking the whip and they open themselves up to give positive feedback,
then they can't be taken seriously.
That they can't be taken seriously, and that this person will actually take their foot off the pedal, or they won't continue to do as good of a job as they've done.
Right.
When actually, the counter is true.
Right.
When you give someone that positive reinforcement, you've literally flooded them with dopamine and reinforced the pathway that led them to do the thing that they did.
Right. So that's the second layer. So the first layer is giving positive reinforcement is vulnerable.
Yeah.
It requires us to come out and actually name something that we thought was valuable to somebody, and to slow down and to like allow for that. The most vulnerable emotion in the world to feel is joy. So you talk to particularly a lot of parents after they have a newborn child, and they want to plan and they feel anxious. And the reason is, if you're allowing yourself to open up to joy, there's this like worry that creeps in that says like, whoa. You're not prepared for bad things that could happen. Instead of being joyful, you should protect yourself. You should protect yourself by planning.
Right.
And so like it's a vulnerable thing to give people compliments, to get to just say positive feedback to somebody, to express joy or appreciation.
Right.
There's inherent vulnerability built within there, and we haven't necessarily built those skills. The second one is there is a massive myth that was built decades ago.
Yep.
That really centuries ago, that says that if you want to get taken seriously and you want people to work hard, you have to be mean and ruthless and vigorous, and you shouldn't give them praise.
Right. It's a dominator, tyrant.
We see that within our workplaces. We've seen that within our schools. But the fact of the matter is, it's not true. When you look at the research, we have learned very clearly. Just like in the last 75 years, we have gone from typewriter to computer to internet to AI. We've had that same rate of innovation with our behavior science. But most of our institutions, our schools and our workplaces, our myths and traditions for how we do management have not really evolved since the 50s, 60s, 70s.
But what about this idea that if I'm too nice, I'm going to get taken advantage of? Or if they don't know that I'm capable of...
I would say that's not rooted in the science. The science doesn't back that up. That is a good expression of that first layer. That's you trying to protect against the insecurity and vulnerability and thinking, I have to stay prepared and vigilant so that I don't get hurt.
Right.
And that's bullshit.
Right.
Your responsibility as a leader is to empower people, not to project your own insecurities onto them and to act from that place.
So stronger leaders are more vulnerable, and that gets expressed through giving positive feedback.
Yeah, you just have to look. You just have to look at some of the most high-performing teams that have had people that we look at and say, "Holy shit, they were amazing leaders." Yep. You look at like Greg Popovich with the San Antonio Spurs or Phil Jackson, and like they weren't like soft, touchy-feely guys that were weeping all the time. They were like rigorous. You talk to Greg Popovich or like talk to anyone that played for him.
Yep.
Like he was cursing at his players. Even Tim Duncan, who's one of the at least top 3 greatest power forwards of all time, he's ripping into those dudes.
Right.
But you know what? He also hugs them, tells them that he loves them, and gives them consistent feedback that is timely, that's both positive and negative. When they do something well, he tells them, he says, hell yeah, that's the best I've seen your shot going in all fucking season. You've been putting in the work. So it's about letting go of like trying to play the character of manager at work that has been programmed by, what the last few decades, whoever gave you that idea, and instead taking some lessons from the behavior science. We actually know how to empower consistent high performance. We know how to change behavior, and that's what management is all about. And so this is not a knowledge gap problem. This is an implementation problem. And the people that have been harnessing those behavior science lessons really well, a lot of leaders within sports, there's a lot of lessons to learn within coaches because there's a massive competitive advantage, and quite frankly, they have a shit ton of money that incentivizes them to do well, so they have a little bit more space to really be innovative with the latest science.
Right. So it's not only that, like, oh yeah, I'm a leader, and if I want my people to do certain things well, I should be giving them positive feedback. And it's not like I should go out of my way to like find things that sound like positive feedback. It's actually that if somebody on your team has done something that warrants positive recognition and reinforcement, and you don't do it, you are missing the biggest opportunity. You are losing.
And you're creating an exponential negative impact while missing the opportunity for an exponential positive impact.
Yeah.
And so it's never neutral.
Right.
When somebody does something that they're hoping is acknowledged, when you're actually able to capture that and within a timely period, recognize it authentically somehow, it gives that person a little boost in their sales. They trust you a little bit more. And when you don't do that, they're like, okay, you know what? I don't know that I want to try as hard. They just try a little bit less hard.
How many leaders do you think are really good at, are elite at giving feedback?
10% at best.
10% at best. How many are decent at giving feedback?
33 at best.
Okay, so a third of, maybe we'll say 10% to a third of our leaders are good, are okay at giving feedback. The problems is that we don't really have any time or space. We're so overwhelmed. There's the emotional resistance to us giving us that feedback, and it was never actually modeled for us.
We've had no practice.
Right.
And that's with every relationship. We've had no practice for actually feeling what our internal experience is, thinking strategically about what we need and what matters to us, and communicating that with another person who's feeling something different and is thinking different things. And that's what business is. That's what management is. That's what friendship is.
Right.
Anything that you're doing with another human being where you guys are trying to do something together requires that you have those skills. The less of those skills that you have, the harder it's going to be to work together.
Yeah. And it's like, if our leaders, if we could create spaces for our leaders to be able to reinforce their ability to give feedback, it almost sounds like that would have one of the greatest impacts on an organization's sense of motivation, purpose, connection, and belonging.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we found just through the last year talking to all sorts of different like C-suites and managers was like the complaint with performance reviews. Like a lot of them are like, I would love to be more like a sports coach. Like if you go and you watch any football coaches, like they are out on the field consistently giving feedback continuously. It's like what if you had a personal trainer that once a year was giving you input? Is that going to have much of an impact? Of course not. They're there with you, giving you a shit ton of feedback.
Daily.
Most of those leaders that we talked to wanted to, but they weren't really sure exactly how. And like, where's the line for like when I give what kind of feedback? Where do I do that? And when it comes to performance reviews, like where do I find the time? We have to shut down our business sometimes to do like real performance reviews with people. And I'm having to like write things down that could be captured other places. I wish there was an AI tool. So it's worth naming that like a lot of people want to be better at that, and there are better ways we could be doing it. And I also want to take this moment to call us out. It sounds like in this conversation, you and I have done a good job really mapping out like the deeper context as far as like the soil that we stand on as a business, and like some of the like wind that's in our sails and some of the general direction that we're going. But we haven't necessarily talked about like the vehicle of who we are and the exact things that we're doing, which I know is something we committed to each other that we're going to do today. So we're going to do that at some point later today. We're going to fill this fucking whiteboard up. But I'm talking with my hands a lot, so you can tell I'm lit up. So this has at least helped me get a little bit more energy and clarity about some of the story we've been holding that we have built our business on top of, which now we're going to clarify so we can launch this new website in the next couple weeks.
Yeah. What I'm taking away from this conversation is that if you're a leader at an organization right now and you're tasked with how do we install artificial intelligence into our organization in a way that's going to make you more resilient and more empowered to innovate in the future,
Yeah.
it's really tempting to repeat the same cycles that we did, where we're going to need all of these new platforms that we're going to install that are going to shift incrementally how we work, maybe some of them exponentially, but that there's actually this massive opportunity to leverage AI in a way that harnesses the natural intelligence of our people
Yeah.
by taking a lot of the overwhelming things that cause us to have to context switch, take that off of our plate to diminish that cognitive load, while then increasing our ability to do those things that reinforce what our people are doing well that so often goes unseen.
Yeah. There's an opportunity and an invitation right now to be preparing your organization to be its most innovative, to give yourself the greatest chance of serving whoever your stakeholders are and scaling your business. And that opportunity isn't consistently, rigorously scouring the market for the latest AI tools and actively trying to push as many people within your business to explore and implement as many as you possibly can, and wrestling with, do we use this latest AI bookkeeping software, this latest AI CRM? What if another one comes out soon? Like, do we then use that one? Should I replace all my toothbrushes with AI powered toothbrushes, which I saw yesterday and I thought was an SNL skit? That's not the point. The point is, you can be doing something right now. You can be strategically planning for a way to prepare your entire organization to be getting better and better at implementing and utilizing the latest AI tools. And the way to do that is to upgrade your operations for how people collaborate together, and upgrade the way that your leaders are leading, upgrade the way that feedback is being delivered so that trust and hope are being nourished, to commit to for yourself being an embodied, relational, purposeful leader who is thus empowered, creating an empowered organization, empowered to do what? To fucking crush it sustainably, to regenerate each other, to be an organization that gets shit done without making people smaller and smaller and more fractured. And what that allows you to do is then have resourced people who have the capacity to embrace change, to then go out and try out new AI tools, to diversify and spread out and share the burden of trying to implement the latest technologies. They'll be open to it. They'll be more curious. You can incentivize them to seek out ways to innovate workflows and operations with AI, to augment and automate whatever it is that your business needs. But if you want to be making an impact, you feel like you want to be doing something, that's the thing to do.
We're in such a fortunate position because we get to play the role of the product builders who are shaping and designing these new tools that are empowering these organizations to completely reshape how they relate to AI in their own work. And at the same time, as powerful facilitators and communicators and trainers, we can also create the space for these organizations to actually open up towards and vulnerably share the fears that they're holding around AI, the challenges that they've had working together. And the coolest thing that we've done in the last even 2 weeks is we worked with a certain organization and we saw how just helping the team acknowledge the things that they did well, helping them acknowledge with each other the things that they did well, while also creating space to take a look at all of the things that they had been struggling with. And instead of blaming each other, seeing the systematic interdependence between those teams created so much space for them to be like, oh, this is how we have to start executing on these strategies. And these are the tools that we're going to need to implement. That's the coolest thing about what we get to do in terms of both straddling the service And really, this is servant leadership. We are going in and empowering these leaders to create the spaces for their teams to actually talk and to get real about what's going on while designing and creating and implementing these solutions that are going to forever change how we work together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so many companies that are just operating in overwhelm are not able to really just fully audit how their operations are getting done and how people currently are executing and feeling. And it's so cool when we get to work with these companies and we get to map out what your operational needs are and how people are doing, burnout, motivation, trust-wise, what management relationships are working really well, what's not, and just like to map that out and show the vicious cycles that are hindering efficiencies. Like, it can sound very like cold and structured, but it's so empowering to then be able to just look at all of it and then start to get strategic about, oh, how can we shift things, how can we create. So like that was really cool in that conference room to actually like dive into that with them.
Yeah, I'll leave our listeners off.
Leave them with something.
Let's
something good.
Let's leave our listeners off with a quick, nudge or question to hold on to as we all go into the rest of this week, the months ahead, and then this, AI summer that's in front of us, which is, what are the smallest shifts that you could introduce within your own workflows or with your team that can call on the natural intelligence of your team? What are the smallest things? Like giving someone genuine positive feedback is an example of, everyone talks about nudges. It's the smallest example of something that we can nudge you to do that's going to have a transformative impact on your team. And these are the types of things that for a completely overwhelmed workforce are all that we can ask at this point. So what's the minimum viable shift that you can make in how you're showing up with your teams that's going to create more space, more curiosity, more motivation, that's going to allow us all to collectively exhale and feel that recognition or whatever it is that's going to move people forward? What is that smallest thing? And the second thing, this is the harder one, is what do you think you're doing right now that's undermining that value?